In this lesson, we are going to talk about 21 chess tricks that will surprise your opponents. So it's a very common thing that tactics decide about 95% of the games of amateurs and beginners. So a single move can completely change how the game proceeds. So in this lesson, we're going to look at some of the most popular ones and also give you an exercise so that you can practice your freshly learned skills immediately. Here we go. We are going to start with the first one, and this is the so-called double attack. What does it mean? It means that you are targeting two things at the same time, and this is a very popular motive and quite often missed at the club level. So here, white is to play. White starts with the move knight x and f6. So the point is we're opening up the bishop here, hitting the pawn on h7, and after bishop takes on f6, queen e4. Now where's the double attack? We are not only threatening with the checkmate on h7, but also attacking the knight. So black cannot defend both of these two things at the same time. So most likely, for me, he has to defend from the checkmate because it's a more senior threat, and then he loses the piece. Now let me show you an exercise which is going to feature exactly the same idea. So this is some sort of a Scandinavian defense gone wrong. Maybe that's even not really important, but the thing is the queen on c6 for black is out in the game. So if you know something about openings, you know that you should not be developing a queen so early, because if you attack it with something, it's going to cut retreat, losing valuable time. But actually in this position, there is a double attack. Now the question is, can you find it? If you thought about this position for a while, you definitely found this very nice pattern bishop b5. So we are pinning the queen and the king. And after queen takes on b5, knight takes on c7 is actually a checkmate. But I mean, in the worst case, you can just take on b5, the queen, and enjoy your spoils of war. So this pattern is very important, and now you're going to recognize it in similar positions. Let's move on to the second example, which is a classical fork. So what's a fork? So here, black plays bishop e6. So he, tries to do something in the center here. And this walks directly into a fork. So the point here is black cannot take on d5. It's well defended by the pawn and the knight, and it doesn't matter what black does. After bishop d7, you take on c6, you have effectively one material, because obviously a pawn is worth 1 unit and the minor piece is worth 3. So black loses material. But now let's have a look at an exercise. So here in this position, black played bishop f5. So it's a bit more complex position, but I believe you still can do it. How can we create a fork here? So in a classical sense, a fork is a pawn move, mostly, that attacks two minor pieces. And when you think about that, it's like, oh yeah, right. I can play e4. With e4, you're hitting a knight and hitting the bishop at the same time. So where's the catch? Black plays bishop takes on e4. And now comes queen a4, which essentially is a double attack, something we already discussed. So you see, this is a check. We're hitting the bishop, and quite unfortunately for black, he's going to play bishop c6 to defend against both of these threats because the knight is in the way. So the bishop obviously cannot jump over the knight. All right. Now let me show you another exercise. So we are going to talk about a discovered attack. It means we are removing a piece, usually with a check, and then black has left something under attack. So here the question is, did white just blunder something? What about a pawn on d4? Why can't you take it? Let's find it out. So the point is after knight e4, and queen d4, it seems that black is doing great, right? He just won a pawn. He's about to take the pawn on e5. But the queen on d4 is not really so well positioned. There's the discovered check. And after bishop b5 check, you see the king has to move, or it's the bishop move, and black loses the queen. Even more, after bishop d7, first we are going to take the bishop with a check. then collect the queen for free, and essentially this is game over. Now let's have a look at the exercise. So here, can we find a discovered attack? So I think it's a good idea first you formulate which piece is going to participate in this direct attack. Probably the bishop on f6, because it's indirectly hitting the rook on a1, but there's the pawn on c2 standing in the way. And when you formulate, oh, right, of course, it's got to be the pawn that moves. So you play c2, this is a discovered attack, you move the pawn, you hit the rook, and if white takes it here on c2, then bishop takes on a1, it's simply an extra rook for black. I mean, of course, black could play something like queen c1, you could just take on a1, queen a1, and now the c pawn is incredibly strong. Something like queen c1 and queen a4, queen b1, or queen b4, queen b1. This pawn most likely will be another queen. Another exercise, another element we have to look at, and that is the trapped piece. And trapped pieces very often happen at the club level. So here black was pretty careless. Black decided to play knight x on d5. So black's position feels perfectly safe. However, after knight e5 and queen d5, here comes a surprising move. c4. Even though this weakens the d4 square, now you notice the queen has to move, because obviously it's the most valuable piece on the board, and after the queen move, you trap the bishop. There's no way for the bishop to go. I mean, there's no escape route. You can't take on c5. I'm just going to take it. There's no bishop a5. So these three pawns are essentially capturing the bishop on b6. Now let's have a look at the exercise. So here, black plays queen takes on b2. It's seemingly an extra pawn. And you're thinking like, what if I play rook b1? No, I'm not trapping the queen. It's queen takes on c3. But definitely trapping the queen is going to be the key idea here. So if we defend the knight and then try to trap the queen and the rook, the queen most likely will run away. And that's why here there's this very famous idea to play knight a4. And suddenly the queen is trapped. Because you can't take on a1, the rook is protected. You can't take on a3, the pawn is protected. And the knight on a4 hits the queen and also takes away the b6 square for the black queen to escape. There's no queen c3 as well. Literally every single piece where the black queen could go, it's under attack, including the d4 square. That's it, and black just loses the queen. Actually, to make things more interesting, this is a very known trap. As soon as black plays queen b6, sometimes white can respond with a3, seemingly falling for queen b2 only to trap the queen with knight a4. Now you know it. Another element here we have to talk about is the so-called undermining. So here, black defends the queen on f6 with the king on g7. So we need to find a way to deflect the king from defending the queen. And when you think about that, oh, yeah, now this is pretty obvious. You play rook h7 check, so the king has to move. And after king h7, we play queen f6 and we win the game. Now, let's try to have an exercise. So here, it's going to be pretty similar. So black played rook a2. And black is having some ideas like trying to checkmate, I don't know, in a way, to go for some attack against the pawn on g2. And if you formulate that your idea is queen g7 checkmate, and obviously it does not work because the queen protects it, we can use this rook to deflect the black queen. So we play rook e8 check. Black has no choice. The rook from the a file is gone. So after queen e8, we deliver a checkmate. Let's move on. A very, very dangerous idea is a pin. A pin is that causes for a lot of players massive headache. So here after knight f6 is a very common mistake in the Caro-Kann. We can immediately exploit a deadly pin at the file. And after this surprising knight e6, this is not only a check, it's a checkmate on the board because black cannot take it. The king is pinned. So make sure you do not fall for this. But now let's have a look at an exercise. So here, after knight x on e4, the question is, can black take the pawn on e4 for free? The answer is no. Why is this? Because the black king is still in the center, and after rook e1, you see we are pinning the knight with the king. So it seems that black is like, all right, he protects the knight by playing f5, and you can't take on e4, I'm going to take your rook. But now there's the problem. We play f3, and this knight cannot retreat because this is simply an illegal move. You cannot leave the king under attack. So black has to do something else, and the knight falls. So whenever you're sitting from the black's perspective, wondering why my opponent is giving up the pawn on e4 for free, remember, maybe there is a pin that my opponent is planning, and this could be a trap. Let's have a look at another position here. So here, black is seemingly having an equal position. White actually is pretty active here with the rook on b8. So what we can do, we can eliminate the defending piece that holds together the position. So here the bishop on c1 holds the pawn on f4, right? So I'm thinking, if I take on f4, my opponent is going to take with the bishop. So sometimes there is this possibility that we can make a sacrifice, like rook takes on c1, to get the king here. Not the bishop takes on f4. You see, it's not only a check to the king, but also very conveniently, the rook on b8 is lost. Now, in the following exercise, we are going to have something very similar. So you already see the arrows here. The king on h2 is seemingly in a safe place. The knight on e4 and the rook on e1, they give you some attacking ideas. And now here indeed, we are going to force the king on h1 into a fork. So the correct move is rook h1 check. White can't play king g3 because the knight on e4 protects it. And there's the pattern. White has to walk into a fork, and black simply collects the queen and wins the game. Another example will be the so-called overloading, when your opponent can't protect everything at the same time. And this happens when the same piece or even a couple of pieces have many things to do at the same time. So here we have this position. White is seemingly safe. So the queen is under attack. You're thinking, I could take on b7 and try to deliver a mate. Oh wait, but there's no mate. There's knight c1. You see the knight on e2 protects the c1 square. But when you look at the position more closely, you start to wonder, wait a second. So white has some problems with the back rank, and also the queen on b7 is barely defended. Could it be that this position is where white's pieces are slightly overloaded? And actually this is the case, because you can play rook c1. Now the point is, after rook takes on c1, white will leave the queen on b7 undefended. And you just collect the queen. And if white takes on c1 with the knight, now white suffers because of the back rank issues. So that's it. After rook c1, white has no defense here because the king has no escape route, and he has to accept rook, either accepting queen loss or a checkmate on the board. Now there's going to be an exercise. So here in this position, black played short castle. So black's position feels pretty safe, but still black is overloaded. What does it mean? It means that here after f6, suddenly he doesn't have a satisfactory defense to hold the knight on d6. So if he takes on f6 with a pawn, the knight on d6 is lost. And now the key idea is that after bishop takes on f6, bishop takes on d6, you see this pawn on e7 is overloaded. It cannot defend both squares at the same time. Maybe it's better seen here. So this poor pawn on e7 is doing too many things. And after bishop takes on d6, black has to make a choice. If he takes on d6, rook f6, white is simply up a piece. Another element that we have to know is the so-called double check. Now a double check is a very, very nasty thing. And this can happen when you give check not only with one piece, but with two pieces at the same time. And by definition, you cannot defend against a double check by putting something in front, because your king is attacked not only once, but twice. So here a typical double check would be knight g3 double check. You see the rook on h8 is hitting the king on h1, but so is the knight on g3. So white cannot take on g3 because this would be your normal move, but the rook on h8 also gives the check. And white cannot play knight h2 to cover from the check because the knight on g3 hits the king on h1. So it's king h1, and now there's a rook h1 mate on the board because the knight on g3 protects the rook. This also could have been a mate, double checkmate, so to speak, if white gets something on g1, and basically that's just ends the game immediately. Now let's have a look at the example. So here, after black played rook a8, it feels that black is doing great, and we are gonna see an actual double checkmate on the board. White plays rook d8 mate. Now why this is a mate? Because the bishop on c4 is under attack, the rook on d8 is under attack as well, but these are two checks at the same time. So black on attack on c4, the king is under attack by the rook. Black on attack the rook on d8, the king is under attack by the bishop. Black cannot play king f7 because this square is contested. So essentially this is a checkmate on the board, even though white's pieces are under attack. A very important element for you to know, a tactical trick to be aware of, is the so-called skewer. So skewer, it means when you are attacked typically by a diagonal or the vertical. So here after h1, you see black promotes first, but it's white who promotes after. You see queen a8 check, hitting the king on e4 and hitting the queen on h1. So this is what we call a skewer. Yeah, so the king casts a move, and after king e5, collect the queen, and you're winning the game. Now let me show an exercise that was going to allow to illustrate the skewer idea. So here we are not attacking diagonal, we're using a vertical. So we are going to play rook d2. So the queen on d3 is hit, the rook on d8 is hit as well, and black is inevitably losing material. Because if the queen retreats, you just take on d8, rook d8, queen d8, we are just winning the extra rook. And black cannot defend the rook on d8 by any other means. So if black takes on d2, we have the bishop on b4 to protect the rook on d2, and we're simply winning material. Let's have a look at more tactical tricks. And one of the most important things when you're doing an attack is recognizing what holds together your opponent's position. So this is essentially the trick of removing the defender. So we are having here this nice attacking position, the queen on d6, bishop on d7, c7, they're attacking the pawn on g3, but as you can see, the pawn on g3 is protected by the pawn on h2. And if you now formulate the idea, if I get rid of the knight of the pawn on h2, the pawn on g3 falls, right? All right, that's why we have rook takes on h2. Now you see there's no longer the pawn, knight h2, there's coming queen g3, the king's only move is here, we take it, the king is coming here, and now we push the king further. Check, check, and I believe this is a skewer. Because now white has no choice but to play king g3, we collect the queen, and we're winning the game. So we use two elements, two tactical tricks to get the winning position. Let's have a look at the exercise. So here we see we have some pins. So there's a pin, there's a pin, and there's some serious pressure here. So we can use these elements to make a trick. Now the key idea here again is, you see, I would love to take on c6, but after b takes on c6, black is probably just fine. What if I remove the defender? The defender is the pawn on b7. There you go. You just play rook takes on b7. Black accepts it. You take on c6. Now black gonna take on c6 because the queen is lost. And also the two rooks are under attack. So here black goes here. You can take on e8, you can take on b7, whichever you want. This is slightly more accurate. Now the point is after queen b7, queen e8, white is just up a rook, and actually even more. There's more stuff incoming. Let's move on to the next example. So here, a very important element and trick that is missed at any level, and not only at club level, sometimes even at the titled level, is the so-called in-between move, the intermezzo move, the Zwischenzug. So it has many names. So the point here is that the queen on d5 for white is defended. If we take on d5 with a queen, white just takes on d5. Like he's just fine. So again, we formulate, what about I eliminate the knight that protects the queen? So we play knight takes on c3. Now white's queen on d5 is under attack. White plays queen d8, and you would think, okay, I gotta take on d8. White's gonna take on c3, and we still get the same position. But now comes into play the so-called in-between move, the Zwischenzug, the intermezzo move. So the term that has several different names. So we give a check. You see the queen on d8, this is not a check to the king. We don't have to take it. So we remove the knight to a square with a check, and only then take the queen. And now the difference here is after king f1, rook d8, our knight remains on the board. And white cannot win it. Maybe white goes here, tries to hit the knight, we just go back. And we just saved a full piece. And now we're winning. Let me show you now an exercise. So, how do we make here an intermezzo move? So this is the position. Black at the moment has an extra pawn on the board. But if you look at the position more carefully, you notice the queen is kind of vulnerable. Is there a tactical element here? Yep, there is. You can play rook takes on b5. Now we're hitting the queen. So obviously black cannot take on b5. We're just going to collect the queen for free. Now where's the idea? After queen takes on a3, it seems that we have to take it. We just lose an exchange. But this is where the so-called in-between move comes in. You play rook b7 check, hitting the king. And only then you take the queen. If black plays rook f7, we still do not take the queen on a3 because we will lose our rook. Now again, another intermezzo move, the in-between move, rook f7 check. You see the key move is the check move. So black has to take it, and after b takes on a3, finally we collect the queen and we have an extra piece. Pretty impressive. Another trick that sometimes you have to keep a close eye on is very often the f7 or even f2 square for both sides, because this is the most vulnerable square in the position. So very early in the opening, keep your eyes open. Maybe there are some tactical elements that might immediately decide the fate of the game. So we're going to play d takes on e5. And let's say black responds with d takes on e5. Suddenly, after queen d5, how do you defend? This pawn is almost impossible to defend. And after knight h6, again, we formulate the idea, wait a second, so the knight protects the pawn, let's eliminate the knight. So we play bishop takes on h6, and black cannot take on h6. It's just going to be a mate on the board. So whatever the black does, you're simply up a piece. Let's have a look at the exercise. So again, it's going to be the f7 square. Here, black made a mistake. This is a pretty common trap in the opening. You always have to be on your alert that bishop takes on f7 might work. It also might not work. There's no guarantee. But as long as you know that this is the idea you have to look at, you might win a game very quickly. Now the point here is that king f7, knight g5, you see the king is under attack. And after king g8, there's the key idea. You play knight e6 and you trap the queen. Again, this idea sometimes works, sometimes it does not work. When it would not work? It would not work in a position where the pawn is not on a5. Now this entire idea of bishop f7, knight g5, knight e6 is simply not working because the queen escapes to b6. So make sure you recognize the pattern and check if it's working. Another tactical trick you have to know is the so-called interference. You include a move to make your idea work. So here, e takes on f6 doesn't work. I mean, the knight is under attack, but I can't do it. Why? The queen is under attack. So you're thinking, wait, it would be great not only to take the knight, but go after the mate. I mean, pawn on f6, queen on h6 is a very deadly combination. You have seen this before, and you know very often it's a mate. So how do we make it work? Since you formulate the idea that the problem is the queen, I mean, I cannot take it. And I can't play h4 to protect the queen or f4 to protect it like this because the knight is just going to walk away and we lose our idea. So we need a forcing move, something that forces our opponent's hand. And there comes the knight f5, which is a very beautiful move because now we're closing this diagonal, not diagonal, but this file. And after e takes on f5, we take on f6. Now you see the queen is no longer hit. And after g6, queen h6, this is just a mate. So there's no defense for black. And also the key idea here, after knight f5, if black doesn't do all of those things, we're threatening with a mate. And if black defends against this with knight e8, we have a different idea, knight e7. And usually this is a combination of two ideas, two tactical tricks that is very difficult to parry. So with the move knight f5, we're not only threatening with a mate, we're not only closing this file, but we're also threatening with a fork. And very often these ideas are almost impossible to parry. Let's have a look at the exercise. So here in this position, the question is, what is the strength in our position? You look in the position, you're wondering, yeah, it's got to be the pawn on c7. I mean, we're about to promote this pawn, right? Okay, now you're thinking, how do I promote this pawn? I want to get rid of this bishop. How do I get rid of this bishop? I want to maybe trade it. I want to play like h4, king h2, bishop h3, trade it. But it's quite slow, right? For example, I go here, he goes here, I go here, he goes wherever. Some random move, I go here. It seems that I have accomplished something. No, I mean, I just actually lost a pawn. So I was not in time to push it forward. But it doesn't mean that this idea doesn't work. So how about we push out the bishop and then close its way back to the defense? You just play f5 and now this pawn is promoting. So g takes f5 is you just promote and that's it, you're just winning. So this bishop is no longer hitting the c8 square. Another very famous trick to know is the so-called windmill. And windmill is the moment when you're hitting the same square over and over and over, but by slowly capitalizing and taking more material. So here we have a classical windmill. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. So rook g7. Obviously black cannot take it. The bishop is defending the rook. You have to go here. Now there's the windmill. Rook takes on f7. That's a check from the bishop. You can't go here. You can't, I mean, you could play e5. It's not going to change anything, but you can't close this diagonal with anything. So you have to go back. Again, rook g7 check. Again, only move here. Now we take the bishop. Check from the bishop. You go back. Rook g7. Now we take the pawn. You get the point, right? Again, we give a check. Rook c7. Rook g7. Rook b7. Same idea. So we are collecting everything at the 7th rank. Again, rook g7. And finally, give a check and collect the queen. So sometimes this windmill idea also works by retreating at this file or this file. It's usually either this knight's file or the 7th rank or the 2nd rank, depending from which side you're playing. But it's a very, very famous idea, and very often your opponent is just completely helpless. Let's have a look at an example. So this is the position. Now you see our bishop on g5 is pinned by the queen. We can't retreat, and it seems that white has blundered because you can't move it. You place into like h4. Black is just gonna accept it, and you have no attack. So, but you can still use the windmill idea here. Maybe the first thing you're thinking, yeah, what about bishop h6? This has got to be the windmill, right? No, it's not a windmill because queen h5, rook g7, king goes here. You see, you have no check from the bishop. But the key idea indeed is here, that is bishop f6. You give up the queen to set up the windmill. So black has to accept it. His own queen is under attack now. I mean, you have to take it. Now comes the check. And we start the windmill. We take it. You can't close this diagonal. You have to go back. Rook g7. We go here. Now we take the bishop here. Now we give a check again here. I mean, we could take the pawn on a7, but it's going to allow to activate the rook. You can always repeat the position here and there just to make a draw. But here we collect a queen. Check. Here, rook takes on h5, and we're winning the game. A very important element, especially in endgames, and this is something you're not going to see in openings, basically never. Sometimes in middle games, but it's pretty rare. And we call it Asutswang. Asutswang is, I believe so, at least a word from the German language, and that means a situation where you have no move that gives you a good position. It's like you're doing okay, but when you have to move, you're losing. So this is one of those situations. After king g6, king goes here, king h5. If black is able to stand and do nothing, basically what I'm saying is that I'm knocking on the table and I'm saying it's your move. I'm not going to move this time. I'm just going to sit here on f4. It's illegal. You can't do it. You have to move. You always have to move. And sometimes by this Zugzwang, by the fact that you have to move, your position becomes losing. And obviously, endgames are all about Zugzwangs, because otherwise the pawn endgames would not be even playable if the opponent can choose to skip a move. And black has to move. So he has to go here. Now after king g5, white wins. Now let me show you an example how a Zugzwang will look like. This is actually a very famous study, because now white has to play. You see the rook on c6 is under attack, the pawn on b6 is under attack, so we have to find a way to win this. Now 8x on b6 is also a threat, bring the rook in the game, so the key idea here is to find a way to imprison the rook on a8. So rook d6, 8x on b6 is just going to be a draw. b7, you're dropping the rook here on c6. So the key idea is sacrifice the rook. Rook c8 check, king takes on c8, b7, king b8. Now what? So it feels like black is still okay. So you take on a8, you gotta take on a8, right? You gotta take on a8. No, you don't. You play d5, and black is in a Zugzwang. So everything is blocked. Nothing is moving except the king. Only move is king c7, and you're probably feeling very excited. I'm about to put a queen on the board. And I'm winning, right? No, it's a stalemate. It's a stalemate. You can't move anywhere. Wait, what about I'm promoting to rook? Still a stalemate. Wait, what about if I'm promoting to a knight? You're dropping the knight. And that's why the only way to win this is actually pretty amazing. You put a bishop. And now after under promotion to bishop, king b8, bishop b7, black has to move, and now you're winning this. King a7, king goes here, king goes here, here, here. You're collecting these points, you're winning the game, because we have the pawn on d5 that is about to promote to a queen. How about that? One of the important things in chess is finding a way to deliver a checkmate. And obviously, when your opponent has a vulnerable king, you're looking for ways to exploit it. So here we have this position. You see the king is wide open. There's so many light square weaknesses here. And I'm seeing immediately, wait, I have the weakness on h7. I have to get there the queen. Because if I get the queen on h7 immediately, that's a checkmate on the board, right? But the knight is under attack. And as far as I know, you can't jump over the bishop. But what you can do, you can remove the bishop with the check. So you play bishop d5. You open up the way for the queen. Black has to accept it. Queen h7 is the mate on the board. A very nice trick to know. Now let me show you an exercise. So here, what we can do. We can find a way to bring more pieces in the game and use the h-file open. So how do we properly use the h-file? Look at this. So obviously the big idea, if you've seen the idea before, is at some point to play knight g3, h takes on g3 and use the h-file. But the key idea is to find a way to bring the queen to the h file. So if you want, you can stop here for a moment, try to figure it out yourself, but the sequence is beyond amazing. Look at this. So we start with bishop b5. What's that? So you have to take it, right? Now we play knight g3. You don't want to give away the queen, do you? So h takes, here. Now we find a way to get the queen to the h file. Check. Bishop c5. You have to take it, right? Check. Oh, there's the idea. Now the point is queen h5 doesn't work. You take the queen, king g1, queen h2 is checkmate on the board. So we opened up path for the pieces. Again, let's look at the starting position. So the queen here is instrumental in getting the king. And we have seen this pattern from somewhere that with an open h file, this is very dangerous. But I can't get the queen easily to the h file because it's so far away. So we have to remove these pieces first. And that's why the correct way before playing knight g3 is started with bishop b5. Because what if a white doesn't take on b5? He does something else. Well, then we just take the rook at f1 and win the game. One of the most important tricks is a simplification. So here we have a tactical trick. I'm sure you have seen already some forks. So you see the rook on c5, knight on f6, rook takes on f6 feels to be a pretty obvious idea. King f6 is going to be knight e4. We're just winning a piece, and obviously forks at the club level very often decide the fate of the game because those knights, they're very unpredictable. So now the point is, what happens if your opponent does an in-between move? Remember, one of those tricks where they talked about that he plays rook takes on c3. Now his idea is that after b takes on c3, king takes on f6, black is actually better. Now comes another in-between move. We play rook takes on f7. And after b takes on c3, we simply enter a pawn in game, having up a pawn, and we're winning. So we simplify the position from this great position into a winning pawn in game. Let's have a look at an exercise. So we have an extra 2 pawns in a position, but the pawn on g4 is under attack. Is there a way to defend it? If you see that there might be a fork on f5, you're going to think about, where do I remove the rook to deliver the fork? If you think about that, then you notice rook g5, which is just beyond impressive. Because now, if black takes it, you give a check, we take on g6, we run with a king, and we're just winning because of the extra pawn at the queen side. So it's pretty difficult to spot, but again, it's quite important that you learn to formulate things. So I want to trade the rooks, I want to play f5. How do I do that? Well, if black goes here, we're actually trapping the rook. We go here. And of course, black doesn't want to trade it because we have 2 extra pawns in the pawn in game, and rook g6 is just a 5. That's it. Black is winning. Let's have a look at some more. And this is a very, very important trick that you have to know in pawn endgames. Why to play and win. How do these 3 pawns get past these 3 pawns? And there's a very, very famous sequence you have to be aware of. You start with the move b6. Where's the idea? So, I mean, clearly I just want to promote my pawn. And black has to take with something. So let's say he plays a takes on b6. And now comes the deflection. We play c6. I won't take on b7. And after b takes on c6, a6. I push forward the a pawn. You might argue, wait a second, I mean, clearly black made a mistake. I'm going to take with this pawn. Now we play a6. Again, deflect the pawn and play c6, c7, c8 and promote. It's really nice, but again, you have to remember it might not always work, because obviously a key element is how far of this king. Because if this king is somewhere here, it's not going to work. Yeah, so it really depends. If the king can get close enough to catch those pawns, if it can, then this b6 idea is simply not going to work for you. Because, and if it is, then b6, I mean, if it's very far, then b6 simply wins the game. let's have a look at an exercise. So how do we make promotion? It feels that white is definitely better here. The black king is very far away from those kings and pawns. The white king is also pretty far, so it feels like we have to race. Yeah, we have to race towards the center. Black is going to go here, here. It's going to be a draw, just a draw. Well, not necessarily, because these pawns are on the color of your bishop. And it's all about pushing the pawns forward. So how about we sacrifice something on g7? So I'm thinking, if I play bishop g7, knight g7, I play g5. Is this working? Because the point is, after h takes on g5, h6, this pawn is unstoppable. So it would seem. But now the point is, after g5, black can just take it and stop this pawn like this. So it's all about the correct execution. And the correct move order here, we start with g5. And black takes it here. Now we play bishop g7. Same idea, different move order. And after h6, this pawn is unstoppable. You can't stop this pawn. I mean, you can try to check it out. Knight e6, knight e8, knight h5, knight f5, h7. You can't put the knight to one of those squares that stops the h8 promotion. Also, it's worth saying that after g5, if black doesn't do it, the key goes king b7, you can do this anyway. Bishop g7, knight g7 is g takes on h6. So for example, h takes on g5, just h6, h7, h8, and white wins. One of the most important tricks in any endgame, and this I can definitely guarantee you, I have fallen into this a couple of times myself, so I would clearly remember, is the so-called stalemate. Stalemate is a trick that people keep forgetting all the time. It means you are escaping from a bad position into a situation where your opponent has plenty of extra material, but he can't make any progress, meaning your king cannot move anywhere. Your pawns are blocked, or maybe they're just not present on the board. And that's why stalemate is like a escape of last resort. So here we have this position. It feels that white is just losing, right? That's it. We have to even worse with the king on g would be even worse. So white is just losing probably. Now the queen c5, king c5, black is just advancing here, and that's it. But actually here we can escape with a draw. And the move is the sensational king h1. Now where's the idea? The idea is that obviously after queen takes and f2, you see, oh, that's a stalemate. There's no moves with a king. This pawn is blocked. This means you can't move. And if you can't move, and that's not a check, it's not a checkmate, it's a stalemate. It means the game's finished in a draw. So you could argue, yeah, maybe black can do another move. But this is where we have Asutswang. Black has no other moves. If the king moves, the queen falls. The queen cannot move anywhere else because this is a pin. The pawns are blocked. So black has a very unique position. Black is in a Asutswang, and black has to force a stalemate. A very rare occasion, but here you go. Now let's have a look at an exercise. So here we have the position from the white's perspective, but it seems that if somebody's playing this position for the win, it's only black because the c pawn is advancing. We can't stop it. So once by check here, rook b7, king c8, and it just feels that's it. That's it. Yeah, we're done. But actually here, white can escape with a stalemate trick. If you have seen this particular stalemate, it's a bit easier, but the key idea is you go here. That's a big check. Black has to promote. And now you give a check. Where's the idea? This is a stalemate. Quite unusual because people are accustomed to see the stalemate on the border, at the edge of the board, but also this is a stalemate. Yeah, so sometimes people mess it up in queen endgames with a king here, but king on c8, it's a bit more unusual. And finally, one more final trick. How you can get out of the trouble quite often is the so-called perpetual check. Now, perpetual check is what people are trying to do when you're in trouble, very often in opening. So they try to give a series of checks that his opponent has no defense from. So here you see in this position, we are down 2 pawns. Black is just probably going to win this, trade everything, and win you in a pawn endgame. So we expose the king in a way and give him a lot of checks that he can't find a way to walk away. That's why there's rook g7. Now the point is queen g5, queen f6, queen g5. The position repeats. King h8, queen f6, queen g5, queen f6, queen g5. Oh, sorry, not queen g6, of course. You could continue this position for 100 moves if you want, but I mean, okay, technically you can't do it because if the position repeats 3 times, it's just a draw. So the game immediately finishes. And this is a way how you save the game. And also an exercise here. How can we try to escape in this position? So here black played rook c3. It just feels hopeless. Yeah, we are down on exchange. Black has a lot of passed pawns. So the knight and the rook very often are a very deadly combination. And we can escape with a rather unusual perpetual check, which is knight e4 hitting the rook on c3. So the rook goes here. We give a check. And now this is actually pretty funny because after king f8, knight h7, king e8, it feels that black is crashing through. No. So that's a check and that protects the rook. So you go back, knight h7, black will make progress. Actually, he has to be a bit careful because it seems that king h8 escapes from checks. Except it's a mate on the board. So you can't really do it. So make sure if you are the weaker side that you are looking for these tricks and you can still escape from trouble by perpetual check. Or if you're the stronger side, you understand what your opponent is aiming for, right? That's it. That was the lesson. These were the 21 tricks to surprise your opponents and go out there and use them in your games.